Well, the dismissal of bank employees for comments made on WhatsApp has once again sparked widespread debate over freedom of speech on social media. The four allegedly exchanged messages on the Democratic Alliance's leader, Musi Maimane, and his wife, Natalie. While the bank says the group used insulting language, the accused claim that the move was politically motivated. To discuss this further, we're joined by the Executive Director of the Freedom of Expression Institute, Tusi Fokane. Good to have you. Thanks so much, Tusi, for your time.
Good morning.
All right. What did you make of this whole story? I mean, because we were talking very quickly off air. It's a lot more complex than what we originally had known.
It seems to be slightly more complex. It seems that there's a context in which certain work-related kind of emails were exchanged, and certain political views were expressed relating both to the bank and, as you mentioned, the leader of the DA and his wife, etc. It also seems that there was certain private communication via WhatsApp as well, which I think the bank has also leveled as part of the charges against the four.
Yeah. If these are private WhatsApp conversations, does the bank have the right to monitor these conversations?
Well, you know, I think the challenge is that when an employee signs an employment contract, I think there are certain terms and conditions that you do agree to and agree to adhere to. And I think one of those really relates around not bringing your employer into disrepute. And I think that would extend even to your kind of off-duty communication, as has happened in this case.
You know, I don't think any of us are immune to that. I mean, if I've had a bad day at work, I'll WhatsApp a friend and say, oh man, I had such a bad day and XYZ got me down and this happened, that happened. You know, does that make me sort of in breach of my contract because I am speaking out against the company I work for to a friend in a private conversation?
I would certainly hope not.
I hope not either.
I think what's even challenging about this case is the fact that the bank indicated that they were expressing certain political views. So I think we then enter the kind of realm where you wonder, is their right to freedom of expression being limited, perhaps?
Yes.
Because of a certain kind of political view or stance or position that they took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, I think what we need to bring into this is that maybe those were the WhatsApp. I think what they were saying, it's business emails and WhatsApp group conversations. Mm-hmm. So perhaps the WhatsApp groups happen to be work groups. Mm-hmm. Does that make it different? I mean, if we have to look at the legalities of something like that, if I'm having a conversation with just my friends who are not affiliated to my work, and then I have those jibes, as opposed to having a conversation with friends that are on a WhatsApp group. I mean, we have, say, for instance, a Morning Live WhatsApp group, and I start having conversations there that are very politically motivated and perhaps insulting. Obviously, that would make a difference.
Look, so I think there are two kind of components to this. I think the one is your kind of employer code of conduct, where I think certain kind of rules are very well laid out. And I think the other is what it is that you express in private, you know, what you communicate to friends and family, etc. I think for us the challenge here is that it seems to be around a certain form of speech or a certain form of expression that these four employees are being kind of accused of.
Yeah, and also business emails, because that comes into it. Now, let's talk about that, because I mean, you know, I may want to express myself, but it is coming from my work email, and hence, you know, obviously that may be implicating the business that I work for. So you've got to be very careful as well as to the things you talk about, what you discuss over your work email.
One does certainly have to be careful, because I think things like that are governed by your kind of code of conduct, etc. And I think the challenge is that some people tend to make the mistake of thinking that how they express themselves online is different from how they express themselves offline, and people think they are anonymous when they're expressing themselves online, and that's not always the case.
Yeah. You know, one of the emails intercepted by the bank, let's just read it in case people haven't actually had a chance and they're not sure what we're talking about. So this, to quote from one of the workers there, Linda Mahai reportedly said, "I am shocked. Musi Maimane's wife is white." Then one of her colleagues replied and responded, "White voice, white party, white wife. Very soon he will be a Michael Jackson and bleach his skin." And then a further response is, if we don't want white people to look down at us, we then should stop the notion that everything white is beautiful. This was exchanged over their work emails. Now, you know, do the workers, do the staff here who have been dismissed have a case? Obviously, you're not a lawyer, but they're expressing their personal feelings. So is this something that they are not allowed to do through a work?
Okay, so if we look at Section 16 of the Constitution, the kind of expression that they engaged in is not prohibited in terms of the Constitution. They weren't kind of advocating for war or inciting imminent violence, etc., etc. So I think the challenge we would have is when you want to kind of broaden the limitations of the kind of speech that is and is not protected. So extending kind of speech to insulting language or kind of offensive language, etc., is something that is still constitutionally protected. They were merely expressing themselves, and they're well within their rights to freedom of expression.
Yeah. The freedom of expression that we have in our Constitution obviously was adopted a while back. And when I say a while back, this was before social media came along. And times have changed. Times have really changed. Have we incorporated all of this into the laws of the country? Have we looked at what social media has actually done to freedom of expression?
Look, I think there are attempts, some good and some bad. As the Freedom of Expression Institute, we always maintain that the rights to freedom of expression online and offline should be those that are protected by the Constitution. So we wouldn't view the proliferation of social media as a need to have to increase more limits to what it is that people can and cannot say.
Yeah. In terms of social media and expressing yourself, I mean, what should people consider before going out there and expressing themselves? Because it's getting a lot of people into trouble. I mean, this has become, you look at a guy like, for instance, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Every day he brings out another tweet, and some people just saying, you know, tone it down. I'm not sure that this is presidential behavior. But maybe in this day and age, that is presidential behavior and the way people have begun to communicate.
I think let's take a step back. I think look at how it is that you express yourself offline. Because in most cases, your offline kind of behavior will also be mirrored by your online behavior. Yeah. So social media in itself is not necessarily the problem. I think the challenge comes when you're trying to kind of censor or restrict certain forms of speech because of social media as a mechanism that will allow that speech to reach a wider audience.
Yeah. So I suppose that's the idea, is people that didn't previously have a voice now have a voice. And I think it's Emma Sadler, I'm not too sure. She's quite a social media expert, and she's always the one to advocate that if you post something, or if you are not happy to post something and put a billboard up of what you have just said, then do not put it on social media. Because there are dangers with social media, there really are. And I think we're witnessing it on a daily basis. And these 4 staff members now have fallen victim to it. Are you seeing a lot more cases like this coming up?
We're receiving a lot more kind of requests and queries and inquiries. I mean, we were recently asked to comment on a case in the US where right-wing kind of website was taken down because of the kind of speech it was propagating, etc. And I mean, I think whilst it's important to kind of balance the perspectives, our concern is always to ensure that people are still free to exercise their right to freedom of expression.
Yeah. I mean, with this particular case, if we go back to the F&B case, what F&B have said is that there's been a thorough and vigorous internal disciplinary and CCMA progress. They were charged with 10 charges, including gross misconduct and the breach of your duty of good faith towards the bank. So obviously, as you mentioned right at the beginning, when you sign your contract to work for an organization, it's there, it's written in black and white, and if you fail to uphold this, then you could be fired.
I think unfortunately that is the case. I mean, I think what's interesting about this particular matter is that the 4 are now alleging that there was perhaps something more in their dismissal. I mean, I think they've brought up the issue of that they were part of a transformation committee, etc., etc. So I think without knowing the full facts, we have to just take a slightly more kind of balanced perspective, because there may be something more beyond this.
Yeah, there could be, because I think that the employees that were sacked are saying that this has got nothing to do with anything about what the bank is saying. They are claiming that this is racially motivated, and they were just advocating for transformation within the bank. So there could be a case here. or could there not be a case?
I don't know.
You're not a lawyer.
Time will tell.
You're not a lawyer. I think we need to bring a lawyer in on this one and said that they certainly will find this one quite interesting. Just in terms of companies, taking jobs with companies and how companies need to adapt to social media and making rules around them. Do you think that South Africans have actually done that? Have they done a good enough job to incorporate that into their policies?
I think most companies do have social media policies. They do have very clear communication policies. Perhaps an area that could be strengthened is more training for their employees around the do's and don'ts and expectations when employees are online.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of people that do have social media accounts, and they'll always put there in their bio saying, these views are my own and they do not represent the company that I work for. Is that disclaimer good enough?
I don't think so. I mean, I think wherever you kind of are, you would always represent the brand of that particular company. So putting a disclaimer like that, I don't think is going to give you sufficient enough protection.
Yeah.
I think the thing is for people to feel free to express themselves, to be free to express themselves, but also to be mindful when they're doing so.
Yeah, yeah. So are we ever really free? I mean, especially if it's over, okay, we've gathered that on social media, whether it's my private Facebook page, we've seen people get into trouble for that. Twitter, it's right out there, anybody can access that. But my WhatsApp between you and I, you know, I mean, is that not my free space to vent and speak freely?
It is, of course, and I think very kind of difficult to say and measure, which is, I think, why we need very clear rules on what is and is not permissible. So I think the kind of Section 16.2 limitations provide those very clear rules. I think the challenge would be in a private communication between the two of us, and if I take a screenshot and send it to a third party, then, you know, the conversation that you and I just had becomes slightly less private and more public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, listen, it's an interesting conversation and a conversation that I think we need to delve a lot more into as a country and as a society, because that is the way that the youth are communicating these days. Whether we like it or not, that is the form of communication. So we need to be very, very vigilant and careful as to what you put out there. And that fine line between freedom of expression and crossing over the boundaries is a big thing we need to worry about. Mm-hmm. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right. I hope that helped you a little bit. So if you are thinking of sending an email from your work email address that is not necessarily what the company wants their reputation to go against, perhaps you should think twice about that. All right. Thanks so much again for talking to us here on the program from the Freedom of Expression Institute, talking to Tusi Fokane. She's the executive director there. All right. Let's take a quick break here on the program. We'll have some weather for you after that. And then in the next hour on the program, we have got another breakfast for you. So we really are spoiling you this week. And our